They always say blood is thicker than water. But in the glittering mansions of Miami, blood is just a cheap bargaining chip. I make $100 million scandals vanish for the elite within 48 hours. Yet the dirtiest mess I ever cleaned up was my own family's. When my father rejected his 3-month-old twin grandchildren at his doorstep to protect a corporate merger, he did not realize he had triggered a bomb. And I held the detonator. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Lila Sanchez. I am 34 years old, and I am the Director of Crisis Management at Apex Vanguard Solutions. We are the premier firm in Miami for making the ugliest sins of the ultra-rich completely disappear. If a tech executive gets caught with illicit substances in a hotel room, or a senator's son crashes his sports car into a storefront at 3 a.m, I am the one they call. I deal in non-disclosure agreements, hush money, and destroying evidence. I always thought I had seen the absolute bottom of human morality in my line of work. I was wrong. The most ruthless, bloodless monsters I would ever encounter were not my wealthy clients. They were my own parents. It was a Friday night. My parents, Julian and Victoria Sanchez, were hosting one of their lavish, intimate dinner parties at their massive waterfront mansion. Julian and Victoria were real estate tycoons, holding a vast empire built on luxury condominiums and commercial high-rises. To the press and the public, they were the picture-perfect American dream family. They graced the covers of local magazines, smiling brightly, holding hands, and preaching the values of family first. Inside the mansion, crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over politicians and corporate investors sipping vintage champagne. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sickeningly sweet sound of fake laughter. I stood near the marble staircase, holding a glass of sparkling water, utterly bored by the hypocritical performance around me. Then, the heavy mahogany front doors swung open. The classical music seemed to dull as the cold night air rushed into the grand foyer. Standing in the doorway was my older sister, Maya. She was shivering, her elegant evening dress ruined, her face pale, and her makeup streaked with fresh tears. Right behind her stood her loyal nanny, holding Maya's 3-month-old twin babies. The infants were bundled up safely in thick, warm blankets, sound asleep and completely oblivious to the chaos surrounding them. Maya looked like a ghost who had just barely escaped a nightmare. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but loud enough for the foyer to hear. Maya had just discovered that her tech billionaire husband was not only having a blatant affair with his young assistant, but had also been secretly transferring all their joint marital assets into offshore accounts. He was preparing to leave her with absolutely nothing. Terrified and heartbroken, Maya had packed up her babies and fled to our parents' house. She came to the one place she believed would offer her a fortress of legal protection and emotional support. She came home. My mother, Victoria, let out a soft gasp and quickly looked around to see if any of the wealthy guests had noticed the scene. But it was my father, Julian, who moved first. Julian marched toward the front door, his face a mask of absolute stone. He did not reach out to hug his weeping daughter. He did not even glance at the 2 beautiful grandchildren sleeping in the nanny's arms. Instead, he stopped right at the threshold, physically blocking Maya from stepping any further into the house. "What are you doing here making a scene?" Julian hissed, his voice low but sharp as a razor. Maya sobbed, reaching out for him. "Dad, he is stealing everything. He has been cheating on me for months. I need your lawyers. I need help." Julian's jaw tightened. He looked at Maya, not as a father looking at his injured child, but as a businessman looking at a breached contract. "You will walk into this house, you will clean your face, and we will go into my study to discuss exactly how you are going to apologize to your husband." Maya froze. The tears stopped falling as sheer shock washed over her. "Apologize? Dad, he is ruining me." "He is a billionaire preparing for an initial public offering," Julian snapped coldly. "You are his wife. You do not run away." Then, Julian's cold eyes shifted to the nanny standing on the porch with the twins. He pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward the dark driveway. "Leave those babies outside," Julian commanded. The words echoed in the grand foyer. Maya gasped, taking a step back. "What did you just say?" "I said, leave those babies outside," Julian repeated, his tone entirely devoid of human warmth. "They do not cross my threshold. They are the property of his family line. His driver is already on the way here to pick them up. The nanny will wait with them in the car until he arrives. You are staying here to fix your marriage." A deafening silence fell over the entryway. I remained frozen, watching the man who brought me up callously tear his daughter's children away merely to pacify an affluent son-in-law. This wasn't a matter of pride. It was something far more sinister. I didn't hesitate. I acted on pure instinct. I let my glass fall. It smashed against the marble floor, the sudden crash piercing the heavy tension. I strode right past my mother, who was frantically attempting to usher the onlookers back into the dining room. I marched right up to the front door and shoved my shoulder hard past Julian's chest, forcing him to step back. "Do not touch her," I warned him, my voice carrying the freezing, lethal calm I usually reserved for hostile corporate takeovers. I grabbed Maya's trembling hand and spun her around, forcing her to turn her back on the glittering, hollow mansion. I looked at the nanny and gave a firm nod. Without waiting for another word from the two people who called themselves our parents, I led the three of them straight to my black, armored sports utility vehicle, parked in the circular driveway. I unlocked the doors, helped the nanny strap the babies safely into their car seats, and pushed Maya into the passenger side. I climbed into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The heavy vehicle tore out of the estate, leaving the perfect Sanchez family and their crystal chandeliers far behind in the dark. My penthouse occupies the entire top floor of a high-security residential tower in downtown Miami. It is a fortress constructed with biometric retinal scanners, private reinforced elevators, and shatterproof glass spanning floor to ceiling. It was designed to keep the chaotic world out, which was exactly the sanctuary we needed tonight. Once inside, the nanny quietly took the twins into the isolated guest wing. Despite the traumatic escape and the sudden change in environment, the babies fell into a deep, peaceful sleep almost immediately. Maya, however, completely shattered into a million pieces. She collapsed onto my dark velvet sofa, burying her face in her trembling hands. The sheer betrayal from her own blood broke her far worse than her husband's infidelity ever could. She wept until she could barely draw a breath, asking the empty air why her own father would throw her out into the cold in her darkest, most vulnerable moment. I sat beside her, gently rubbing her back and offering quiet words of comfort. But deep down, my mind was already pulling away from the emotional wreckage and shifting violently into high gear. In the world of high-stakes crisis management, you learn to read the spaces between the spoken words. You learn to spot the invisible strings pulling the puppets. Julian Sanchez was a proud, arrogant man, utterly obsessed with his public image. A normal image-obsessed father would have dragged the cheating son-in-law through a discreet, brutal mudslinging campaign, or at least hidden his disgraced daughter away from the public eye to negotiate a quiet, highly profitable financial settlement. But Julian had explicitly demanded that the children be handed over to the husband's driver right then and there. He had acted as an eager enforcer for the very man who had humiliated his family. That behavior was not born of vanity. That was compliance. That was raw, desperate fear. I poured Maya a glass of water, stayed by her side, and waited patiently until utter exhaustion finally pulled her into a restless sleep. Then, I walked into my home office. I locked the heavy acoustic door and booted up my encrypted, untraceable terminal. It was time to treat my own family like a hostile corporate target. I activated the underground shadow network I usually reserved for dismantling rival conglomerates. I reached out to forensic accountants in London, corporate whistleblowers in New York, and dark web data brokers who owed me massive favors. I demanded they rip open the firewall of Sanchez Real Estate Group. I needed to see the real financial health of my father's empire. It took exactly 4 hours and 15 minutes of relentless, caffeinated digging to peel back the polished facade. What I found on those stolen ledgers made my blood run ice cold. Sanchez Real Estate Group was not a thriving, invincible empire. It was a rotting carcass held together by cheap tape and lies. My father had severely over-leveraged the company on a series of disastrous commercial developments over the past 5 years. He was hiding a massive toxic debt, totaling over $450 million. The predatory loans were due in less than 30 days. If he defaulted, the banks would seize absolutely everything. The waterfront mansions, the luxury cars, the philanthropic reputation, it would all be wiped out. He was standing on the absolute edge of total bankruptcy. And my brilliant, ruthless brother-in-law knew it. I intercepted a series of highly classified, encrypted emails exchanged between my father and the tech billionaire just 2 days ago. The cheating husband had offered Julian a golden lifeline. He promised an immediate cash injection of $500 million to save the Sanchez empire from total annihilation. But the bailout came with one sickening, non-negotiable condition. The husband's tech company was going public in exactly 2 weeks. He desperately needed to present himself to Wall Street investors as the ultimate, flawless family man to secure peak market confidence. A messy public divorce and a vicious custody battle over infant twins would destroy his carefully crafted persona and completely tank the initial public offering. So, he bought his way out of consequence. He demanded that Julian and Victoria force Maya into a corner. They had to cut off all her legal, financial, and emotional support, completely isolating her from the world. The sinister goal was to break her spirit so entirely that she would voluntarily sign away full legal custody of the twins, allowing the husband to parade the children around as proof of his perfect moral character. I sat back in my leather chair, staring blankly at the glowing monitors illuminating the dark room. The reality was unbearably vile. My sweet sister and my innocent niece and nephew were nothing but sacrificial lambs. They were literal bargaining chips traded in a dirty backroom economic transaction worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Julian was entirely willing to sell his own flesh and blood into a life of misery just to keep his hollow name in the society pages. A profound, suffocating sorrow washed over me, but it did not last long. In its place rose a fury so hot, so pure, and so focused that it sharpened every single one of my senses. For 10 years, I had used my sharpest, most lethal professional skills to protect powerful, corrupt people from the consequences of their own horrific actions. I had always been a shield. Now, I was going to become a weapon. I was not just going to legally defend Maya and the babies. I was going to obliterate the very foundation of the Sanchez family. My parents worshipped their pristine public reputation above all else in this world. They prayed daily at the altar of high society and corporate prestige. I decided right then and there to burn their precious temple to the ground. I would use every vicious, underhanded tactic I knew to ensure that when the dust finally settled, the Sanchez name would be a permanent synonym for absolute ruin. By 9 o'clock the next morning, the enemy launched their first coordinated offensive. They did not knock on my door to ask how the babies were sleeping. Instead, 2 men in sharp, custom-tailored suits arrived at the security desk of my building, presenting themselves as legal counsel for my brother-in-law. They handed my doorman a stack of cease and desist orders, demanding the immediate return of the children to their legal father. I instructed security to throw the paperwork in the trash and escort the men off the premises. But the attack did not stop at my front door. 30 minutes later, my personal cell phone rang. It was the chief executive officer of Apex Vanguard Solutions. My boss informed me that an incredibly powerful tech billionaire had just threatened to pull his massive retainer fee and blacklist our firm across the entire Silicon Valley network unless I surrendered my sister and stepped away from the situation. The ultimatum was clear. I either dropped my family or I lost my career. I did not even let him finish the sentence. I told him I quit, effective immediately. Losing my job did not frighten me. It simply removed the only leash they had left on me. The real psychological warfare began precisely at noon. My phone vibrated, displaying my father's private number. I walked onto the balcony, stared out at the sprawling Miami skyline, and answered. "You have precisely 1 hour to bring Maya and those children back to this house," Julian demanded, his voice radiating absolute authority. I pressed the record button on my encrypted secondary device. "And if I refuse?" Julian chuckled, a dry, venomous sound. "If you refuse, I will personally release a highly detailed, legally binding medical file to the family courts. A private psychiatric clinic has already evaluated Maya's records. They are fully prepared to testify that she is suffering from severe, violent postpartum psychosis. She will be deemed a danger to herself and her children. She will be committed to a facility, and her husband will be granted sole custody before sunset tomorrow." He was going to frame his own daughter as criminally insane. I felt a surge of pure disgust, but I kept my breathing perfectly even. I needed him to keep talking. I needed him to feel invincible. "You are bluffing," I said, injecting just enough fake hesitation into my voice to make him believe I was panicking. "You cannot possibly forge medical records just to secure a $500 million bailout for your failing real estate company. You are going to ruin her life just so he can have a perfect public image for his initial public offering next week?" Julian took the bait perfectly. His ego could never resist a moment to boast about his own ruthless intelligence. "It is not a bluff, Lila. It is a business transaction. Maya's little emotional breakdown is standing in the way of a $500 million cash injection that this family desperately needs. The paperwork is already signed. The doctors are paid off. You play in the minor leagues, sweetheart. Do not try to outsmart me. Bring her home, or I will make sure she never sees daylight outside of a padded room." "Understood," I whispered, and ended the call. I looked down at the recording file. The trap was armed. While Julian was busy gloating, I was already moving my next chess piece. I contacted a black hat hacker based in Eastern Europe, a ghost I had utilized in the past to expose corrupt politicians. I wired him $50,000 in untraceable cryptocurrency with a single objective. I needed him to breach the high-security surveillance grid surrounding my parents' estate. Specifically, I needed the camera footage and the microphone audio from the front porch from the previous night. 2 hours later, a massive file dropped into my secure server. I played the video. In crisp, high-definition resolution, there was Julian, blocking the door, coldly telling the nanny to leave his own grandchildren outside in the freezing night. It was the final nail in his coffin. I walked back into the living room. Maya was sitting by the window, staring blankly at the wall, a fresh wave of tears threatening to fall. I sat down opposite her, placed my hands firmly on her shoulders, and forced her to look at me. "You need to stop crying right now," I told her, my voice low and unyielding. "They want you broken. They want you terrified because a terrified victim is easy to control. Your husband is going to send you cruel messages. He is going to threaten you. You will not answer him. You will not show him a single ounce of fear." Maya took a shaky breath, her eyes searching mine for strength. "What are we going to do?" I pulled a thick stack of legal documents from my briefcase. "You are going to sign this power of attorney. You are going to give me absolute legal authority to represent you, your finances, and your children. You are going to let me go to war." Maya did not hesitate. She took the pen and signed her name on every single page. In that moment, the weeping, heartbroken wife died, and a mother willing to fight for her children's survival was born. Just as the ink dried, my private courier arrived with the afternoon mail. Resting on top of the pile was a thick, gold-embossed envelope. It was an invitation to the annual Sanchez Foundation Charity Gala, scheduled for tomorrow evening at the Grand Plaza Hotel. It was my father's biggest event of the year, a massive spectacle designed exclusively to court new investors and parade his fake philanthropy before the global press. I stared at the golden lettering on the invitation, and a slow, razor-sharp smile spread across my face. The enemy had just kindly invited me into their stronghold. The battlefield was perfectly set. The first step in any successful ambush is convincing your enemy that they have already won. At 6 o'clock the following morning, I drafted a heavily encrypted, carefully worded email to my father. I stripped away all my usual professional confidence and adopted the tone of a broken, defeated woman. I told Julian that the firm had officially terminated me and frozen my corporate accounts. I confessed that I had absolutely no financial resources left to fight his army of lawyers. I wrote that Maya was completely exhausted, terrified of losing her children to the state psychiatric system, and ready to surrender. The final line of the email was the perfect bait. I promised to bring Maya to the charity gala that evening, where she would publicly apologize to her husband and sign over full legal custody in exchange for his mercy. Julian replied exactly 4 minutes later with a single arrogant word: "Excellent." He was so blinded by his own narcissism and greed that he did not even suspect the heavy blade hovering right over his neck. With the enemy completely lulled into a false sense of security, I moved to secure the battlefield. The Grand Plaza Hotel was a sprawling fortress of luxury, but every fortress has a back door if you know exactly who to pay. Through my 10 years of corporate espionage, I had cultivated an extensive underground network of fixers. By 12 o'clock in the afternoon, I was sitting in a dimly lit service hallway beneath the hotel, handing a heavy leather bag containing $75,000 in unmarked bills to the head of the venue's technical department. In exchange, he handed me a master tablet synced directly to the primary server of the grand ballroom. I now had absolute remote control over the giant LED screens, the stage lighting, and the wireless microphone frequencies. If Julian wanted to put on a grand theatrical show for his investors, I was going to be the invisible director pulling every single string. But destroying their public image was only half of the equation. I wanted them rotting in federal prison. At exactly 3 o'clock, I met with a high-ranking federal prosecutor named Marcus at a discreet, empty diner on the dusty outskirts of the city. 3 years ago, Marcus was the target of a vicious, fabricated smear campaign orchestrated by a corrupt state senator. I had dismantled the campaign, destroyed the senator's credibility, and saved Marcus's career, asking for absolutely nothing in return. Until today. I slid a thick silver flash drive across the sticky diner table. It contained everything. The crisp audio recording of my father openly admitting to criminal extortion, the hacked financial ledgers proving the $450 million toxic debt, the illegal bailout contract drafted by my brother-in-law, and the encrypted emails detailing their conspiracy to forge medical records. Marcus plugged the drive into his laptop. I sat in silence and watched his eyes widen as he scrolled through the undeniable, airtight proof of federal wire fraud, extortion, and corporate conspiracy. He looked up at me, closed his laptop with a sharp snap, and looked me dead in the eye. "I will have federal agents waiting at all the exits by 9 o'clock, he said quietly. The steel jaws of the trap were officially locked. However, I knew the psychology of desperate men. The moment the walls came crashing down tonight, my father and the tech billionaire would immediately try to use the twins as leverage. I had to remove their only remaining weapons from the board. As the sun began to set, a heavy armored transport van idled in the subterranean parking garage of my building. I had hired a private tactical extraction team comprised of 6 former military operatives. Maya hugged me tightly, her previous tears completely replaced by a fierce, quiet resolve. The operatives escorted her and the babies into the reinforced vehicle. They were heading to an undisclosed, off-the-grid safe house across state lines, operating under complete radio silence. They would not return until I gave the all-clear signal. My family was finally out of reach. Now there was nothing left to do but light the match. I walked into my dressing room and bypassed my usual wardrobe of conservative black corporate suits. Tonight was not about blending in. Tonight was an execution. I pulled out a floor-length, backless silk gown in a shade of brilliant, unapologetic blood red. It was a dress designed to command the absolute attention of every single person in a room, a glaring symbol of the punishment I was about to deliver. I applied a sharp stroke of crimson lipstick, slipped into stilettos that echoed like hammer strikes against the hardwood floor, and looked at my cold reflection in the mirror. For my entire adult life, I had operated purely in the shadows, quietly cleaning up the catastrophic messes of the corrupt and the wealthy. But tonight, I was stepping directly into the glaring spotlight. I walked out of my penthouse and stepped into the waiting black town car. As the vehicle glided through the bustling city streets toward the Grand Plaza Hotel, I felt a serene, chilling calmness wash over me. I was walking straight into the tiger's den, armed with the undeniable death warrant for the entire Sanchez empire. The grand ballroom of the Grand Plaza Hotel was a sprawling ocean of bespoke tuxedos, glittering diamonds, and suffocating hypocrisy. Hundreds of the most influential politicians, international investors, and elite media executives in the country were gathered under the glow of 3 massive crystal chandeliers. Waiters in crisp white uniforms circulated silently, balancing silver trays loaded with imported caviar and flutes of vintage champagne. The air vibrated with the low, steady hum of wealth and power. I stood completely motionless in the heavy velvet shadows of the secondary mezzanine, gazing down at the spectacular illusion my parents had built. At precisely 9 o'clock in the evening, the grand orchestral music gently faded into silence. A polite hush fell over the expansive room as my father, Julian Sanchez, confidently ascended the carpeted steps to the main stage. He looked every bit the invincible patriarch. His custom suit draped perfectly over his shoulders, and his silver hair caught the bright glare of the stage lights. He stepped up to the acrylic podium, adjusted the microphone, and offered the audience a warm, practiced, and entirely fabricated smile. "Good evening, my esteemed friends," Julian began, his deep voice resonating with manufactured sincerity through the state-of-the-art sound system. "We gather here tonight not just to celebrate the incredible financial milestones of the Sanchez Real Estate Group, but to honor the very foundation of our enduring success. In a world driven by volatile markets and ruthless competition, what is the anchor that holds us steady? It is family, unconditional love, unwavering loyalty, and the sacred bond of blood. These are not just words to me. They are the core business principles that guide every single decision I make." A wave of polite, appreciative applause rippled through the wealthy crowd. My mother, Victoria, sat at the front table, dabbing a completely dry eye with a lace handkerchief. Julian raised a hand to humble the applause, his smile widening into something almost predatory. And tonight, I am profoundly proud to share this stage with a man who perfectly embodies these very same family values. A visionary leader, a devoted husband to my beautiful daughter Maya, and a brilliant mind taking his own remarkable company public next week. Please join me in welcoming my son-in-law. The crowd erupted into enthusiastic cheers. The tech billionaire, looking arrogant and completely untouchable, stood up from his front row seat. He buttoned his suit jacket and began to walk toward the steps of the stage, ready to claim his fraudulent glory. That was the exact moment I swiped my finger across the digital tablet hidden in my hand. A violent, ear-piercing screech of audio feedback blasted through the concert-grade speakers, forcing half the room to physically cover their ears in pain. Before the crowd could even gasp, the power to the main stage was abruptly severed. The microphone went entirely dead. A second later, the 3 massive crystal chandeliers above the ballroom floor instantly powered down, plunging the entire sea of billionaires and politicians into absolute, disorienting darkness. Panicked whispers and confused murmurs immediately erupted across the floor. Security guards frantically tapped their earpieces, completely blind in the sudden blackout. Then, a single, blinding, white spotlight snapped on. It did not illuminate the main stage. It cut through the darkness and hit the secondary mezzanine balcony, illuminating me. I stood perfectly still, bathed in the stark white light, the blood-red silk of my gown practically glowing against the black background. I raised the wireless microphone to my lips. My voice, amplified and crystal clear, sliced through the chaotic murmurs below. "Good evening, distinguished guests," I announced, my tone freezing and utterly devoid of mercy. My father just spoke incredibly eloquently about the profound importance of unconditional love and the sacred bond of blood. I thought it was only fitting to provide all of you with a real-world, highly accurate demonstration of the Sanchez family values. Before Julian could even shout an order to cut my microphone, I tapped the screen of my tablet a second time. The 40-foot LED screen, positioned directly behind my father, suddenly roared to life, casting a harsh, pale light over the stunned audience. The screen displayed crisp, high-definition security footage. The contrast was physically jarring. Instead of the warm, glittering Gala, the massive screen showed a freezing, dark porch. The hidden speakers pumped the high-quality audio directly into the silent ballroom. Every single politician and investor watched in morbid fascination as my sister Maya, weeping and visibly traumatized, begged for sanctuary. They saw the nanny shivering, clutching 2 tiny, innocent 3-month-old babies wrapped in thick blankets. And then, they saw Julian. They watched the philanthropic patriarch of the evening physically block his own daughter from entering her childhood home. His voice, cold and devoid of any human empathy, echoed off the ballroom walls like a gunshot. "Leave those babies outside." A collective, horrifying gasp swept through the hundreds of attendees. Wealthy socialites covered their mouths in genuine shock. The room was paralyzed. On the main stage, Julian's perfect, arrogant mask shattered into a million pieces. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. The tech billionaire froze at the bottom of the stage steps, his eyes wide with sudden, animalistic panic. "Turn it off!" the tech billionaire suddenly shrieked, his voice cracking violently. "Security, shut that screen down right now." "We are not quite finished," I said smoothly into the microphone, my voice echoing above his pathetic shouting. "Because true family values always come with a price tag. Let us listen to exactly how much my father values his flesh and blood." I triggered the final audio file. The video on the screen faded to black, replaced by a simple, pulsating sound wave graphic. The crisp, undeniable recording of the phone call I had intercepted the previous day began to play for the entire world to hear. Julian's arrogant voice filled the room once more. "It is a business transaction. Maya's little emotional breakdown is standing in the way of a $500 million cash injection that this family desperately needs. The paperwork is already signed. The doctors are paid off. Bring her home, or I will make sure she never sees daylight outside of a padded room." The silence in the grand ballroom was utterly dead. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of total destruction. The sheer magnitude of the pure evil they had just witnessed completely paralyzed the elite crowd. And then, the absolute chaos descended. The room exploded into a frenzy of shouting and movement. Wall Street investors, terrified of being publicly associated with a massive criminal conspiracy and a toxic corporate debt, literally shoved each other out of the way to reach the exit doors. They were abandoning the Sanchez sinking ship as fast as their legs could carry them. The media representatives, realizing they had just been handed the most explosive scandal of the decade, completely abandoned all decorum. Journalists pushed past the fleeing guests, pulling out recording devices and aiming their heavy camera lenses directly at the stage. Rapid, blinding flashes of white light fired continuously, capturing the exact moment the great Julian Sanchez was publicly slaughtered. The tech billionaire was sweating profusely, screaming wildly at the venue staff, frantically demanding his private security detail. He knew his upcoming initial public offering was completely dead, and his personal freedom was evaporating by the second. Julian stood frozen at the podium, his chest heaving as he stared up at me in the mezzanine. His eyes were wide with a mixture of absolute disbelief and uncontrollable, murderous rage. "Lila!" Julian roared, his voice completely raw. He abandoned the podium and lunged toward the grand staircase leading up to my balcony, intending to tear me apart with his bare hands. He did not make it past the first step. The massive, heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom were violently thrown open, slamming against the walls with a thunderous crash. The fleeing guests screamed and scattered as a coordinated team of 30 heavily armed federal agents stormed into the venue. They wore dark tactical windbreakers with large yellow letters blazing across the back. Leading the raid was Marcus, the federal prosecutor, his face a mask of uncompromising justice. "Nobody moves," Marcus commanded, his voice projecting total authority over the screaming crowd. The federal agents instantly fanned out, securing every single exit and creating an impenetrable perimeter. Marcus walked straight down the center aisle, his eyes locked onto the stage. He approached my father, who was now trembling uncontrollably, the last remnants of his fake empire completely turning to ash around him. "Julian Sanchez," Marcus declared, producing a thick stack of legal warrants from his jacket. "You are under arrest by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for systemic financial fraud, corporate conspiracy, and felony extortion. Put your hands behind your back." 2 agents grabbed my father roughly by the shoulders, spinning him around and slamming the heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists. A few feet away, 3 more agents tackled the screaming tech billionaire to the carpet, locking him in iron cuffs as he sobbed hysterically about his ruined company. I stood high above the wreckage, bathed in the red glow of the stage lights, watching the men who had tried to destroy my sister be dragged out of the ballroom in chains. The flashbulbs continued to pop, forever immortalizing their total humiliation. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had completely obliterated them. It has been exactly 1 year since the spectacular collapse of the Sanchez empire. The fallout was absolute, swift, and entirely unforgiving. Julian's massive real estate conglomerate was completely liquidated by federal authorities to pay off his staggering hidden debts, leaving him with absolutely nothing but public disgrace and an empty bank account. Today, both Julian and my former brother-in-law are sitting in federal prison cells, serving out sentences of 15 and 20 years, respectively. The very same elite society that once drank their vintage champagne, attended their lavish galas, and applauded their fabricated moral values now treats their names like a contagious disease. They are nothing but a cautionary tale whispered in the dark corners of wealthy country clubs. The storm finally passed, and the shattered earth settled. Maya finalized her brutal, highly publicized divorce without giving up a single inch of ground. She was awarded absolute sole legal and physical custody of the twins. Furthermore, she secured a massive, multi-million-dollar settlement from the forced liquidation of her ex-husband's tech company assets right before his empire completely dissolved. The terrified, weeping woman who stood on that freezing porch no longer exists. In her place stands a fierce, independent, and incredibly resilient mother whose strength is absolutely unbreakable. As for my own path, I never returned to the corporate shadows. I left my lucrative position and opened my own private consulting firm. Now, instead of covering up the vicious crimes of corrupt billionaires, I dedicate my resources, my legal expertise, and my underground intelligence networks to protecting vulnerable women who are being financially and legally crushed by powerful abusers. I am no longer a protective shield for the elite. I am a lethal sword for the defenseless. It is a warm, peaceful Sunday afternoon. I am sitting on the wooden deck of my new home, holding a cup of hot coffee, breathing in the fresh coastal air. The golden afternoon sunlight spills beautifully across the expansive green lawn. A few feet away, Maya is laughing out loud, chasing after her two beautiful children. The twins are now walking, their tiny, clumsy footsteps accompanied by the purest, most joyful giggles I have ever heard in my entire life. I watch them play in the warm sun, and a deep, profound sense of healing washes over my soul. I used to believe the old saying that blood was the ultimate, unbreakable bond. Now I finally know the undeniable truth. Family is not defined by the people who merely share your genetic code, but are perfectly willing to sell your soul for a financial profit. True family consists of the people who stand fiercely in front of the storm when you are too exhausted to fight. They are the ones who will never, ever abandon you in the freezing dark, and who are entirely willing to burn the whole corrupt world to the ground just to keep innocent people safe. Never let anyone use the word family to trap you in toxicity. If they close the door on you, smash that door to pieces and build a new home for yourself. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Haley Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.